Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think what's interesting about this is everybody's looking for a way to bring kind of this opportunity to every part of our country, not just those places that we talk about and that get centered. And I can tell you that we have a very robust kind of dynamic ecosystem in Fargo, North Dakota. We're seeing it in Bismarck. And just to tell you a story, I used to be the tax commissioner in North Dakota. And we would give retail sales tax permits to people who were body shop guys, right? And they could fix, they could just take a crumpled car and make it like the most beautiful. They knew that skill set. They didn't know how to run a business. They didn't know about capital formation. They didn't know about filing payroll taxes. And so inevitably, a lot of times, because they weren't all that interested in it, those folks would get in trouble. And one of the things that we're concerned about is not just capitalization, but it is the business ability to evaluate risk and to actually look at presenting a business plan in a way that actually encourages investment. And so I think one of the traps that we see is not only state regulation, but federal regulation. So we're doing a couple things. We've introduced with Senator Heller the SEC Small Business Advocacy Act. What do we mean by that? You know, SEC can be a pretty scary place if you're a startup and you realize that you're asking for money, and any day you could get a knock on the door from the state securities regulator, much less the SEC. And so this would provide a single point of entry to SEC for small business so that they could get those skills, they could get the certainty, get the advocacy. The other thing that we've introduced is something called SEED, which we find that once you get a good idea and you actually get a business plan, capitalization may not be the biggest problem that you have, but it's getting that idea to that place where you can actually format it. And we obviously are concerned about rural America, so our idea is that we would do some small-time investment, like $120,000 that a city could then use to encourage investment. In North Dakota, we have a huge advantage because we have a bank. The Bank of North Dakota that gives PACE loans and now is transitioning from bricks and mortar capitalization to looking at how do you capitalize and collateralize intellectual property to guarantee that you're protecting the public fisc as well as not making a bad investment. And so there's things that are dynamic out there that are moving. I'm just wondering about a bill that has been mentioned, HALOs, and that balance of trying to figure out how you help that small business, that great idea, get transition, but how you also protect investors. And so I'm just looking for anyone's comment on if you're familiar with that bill, what's your position on it? Does it strike the right balance between protecting investors and actually getting money into that new startup? Mr. Coupler?
Thank you, Senator. I'm not familiar with the bill. I apologize, but maybe you just give me a couple sentences on it, I'd be happy to comment. I apologize.
Yeah, the legislation would basically make the rules of the road clear for universities and nonprofits. They can sponsor demo days to help educate
yes,
investors.
I'm sorry. Okay.
And so it would lower the barriers on demo days.
Yeah, I apologize. I wasn't
that's
familiar with the acronym, but yes, I
we
know
use
that
tons
very well.
of acronyms here. No one knows what we talk about.
Good. Okay. SEC, I did get that. I got that one. So look, I am familiar with it and do think it's actually quite a good idea. We use demo days quite extensively in Silicon Valley where we're based, and I think the idea that potentially runs afoul of some of these general solicitation rules just seems to me, incongruous with, the actual goals of that legislation. So I am familiar with that, and do support it. I was going to just mention one other thing, if I could, in response to your questions. You mentioned both kind of capital availability as well as many of these businesses who just don't really have fundamental business training and don't understand payroll taxes and other stuff. I think this is another really interesting opportunity in the broader education area. So forget about STEM for now, but just if you go to any business school today, and every business school is teaching entrepreneurship classes and other stuff, and that's wonderful, but obviously targets an incredibly, small minority population of the population who can actually access those courses. But it would seem to be that at the kind of community college and state college level, that there ought to be opportunities where, we can really foster, broader education around entrepreneurship, around business plan development, all these other things, which could complement, a STEM education, but also with some of these foundational business skills. And I think that might be a significant area the government could help.
We find SCORE to be particularly useful, but but I think there's nothing like having that innate knowledge.
Absolutely.
For the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think
Thank you, Senator.
Anyone else?
I think you make an excellent point. We always look at it as you've got the innovator out here. Well, that is typically not the entrepreneur necessarily. They want to do their body shop. They want to play with their tools. They want to write their code. They're terrible at financial statements, negotiating with investors, filling out regulatory forms. So to us, what you see is you need that business piece. And again, I'm terribly biased. I teach in a business school. But you need that entrepreneur, as we define it, as the person who wraps the business around that innovation and works with those innovators. And that's where public policy at the state and federal level can work on those linkages by combining those innovators and the entrepreneurs through training, through education, through community colleges, that whole ecosystem to get them what we call investor ready. And the last linkage is to bring that capital to bear on a quality deal flow. If you have a great innovation, or even just a neat innovation in an area that needs body shops, for example, and a lot of work, there'll be somebody who's willing to invest in that as a return on a debt issue, for example, or a promissory note with a reasonable return. So it's important to understand the linkages between the entrepreneur, the innovator, or the startup person, and the investor.
Can I just follow through with the panel?
I want to step in here if I could, because I guess I'm the one here that represents individual investors. And so I want to, if I could, speak more broadly to the question you're raising about investor protections.
Right.
Because I know that is a major concern of yours. I will say that we're very supportive of the HALOS Act. But in terms of investor protections, first thing I guess I want to say is the internet that has created just enormous changes in the investment community. People don't write checks in investments anymore without doing an awful lot of background and bad guy checking. Don't misunderstand the significance of how that has totally reordered the whole financial community. Second, I want to say FINRA. We have all of a sudden a very effective federal oversight of the securities business. When was the last time you read about a significant investor fraud? It has been a long, long time. I run a firm that's regulated by FINRA. I can tell you it is not a pleasure. They have become tough, effective, knowledgeable, and they don't get enough credit. We kind of labor under our past misconceptions. We had the NASD, which was not particularly effective. I can tell you that the results show that FINRA is hugely effective. I guess I will also say, we don't tell people how much they can gamble in a casino or how big a house or car that they can buy. And all this thinking about, protecting investors, the question here is, why do we want to restrict the access to the best ideas, the best investment ideas, just to the wealthiest parts of our country? Other people, have a belief in the American dream too, and also want to make bets on things they believe in. And so it comes back to the question of capital formation. And I think that we really do a very good job of consumer and investor protection, and I think it gets too much emphasis as these ideas get thrown around.
Maybe the only other thing to add, I work in a very the life science sector is totally regulated, right? So we have, so I live in a world where that's the case, where Scott obviously, doesn't have to always deal with. But I do think, at the end of the day, especially in the life science sector, there is a balance between trying to get more investors to invest in the sector and then in protecting, and it's an area where there's just a lot of nuances, a lot of, scientific understanding and a lot of uncertainty. But at the end of the day, I think it's critical to getting some of these technologies out of universities and onto the market one day. And I think a key link is, I sit on the Coulter Foundation board at Hopkins, and there's no shortage of great ideas, and that's a mechanism to help push it forward in terms of providing funding. But the key piece is, having entrepreneurs who will take it forward and who have the business acumen and background to go and raise money. And I think, and as long as there's disclosure and you have good people who are pushing ideas forward, I think investors will be protected. And the key is just to make sure you have great entrepreneurs who can push these things forward.
I'd just point out, one bad example could bring down the whole house of cards. And so we haven't had a scandal lately, but you know how that is. We overreact and the pendulum swings back. And so we need to make sure that we're informing the investing public on what those risks are. And, too often when we regulate and try and prevent or limit risk, we create a false sense of security. So if it's not going to be regulated and you're on your own, then we need to tell people you're on your own. Do your own due diligence. Don't necessarily rely that this is regulated by the government. It's a challenge.